Hello, welcome to the Animal Zone with Professor Monzon. Today we continue exploring the diversity of animal life. In this video, we will focus on birds. If we can move on. There we go. All right, we will follow this outline from Hickman's Integrated Principles of Zoology, Chapter 27. I will start by briefly introducing what is a bird. Uh, then we will talk about the origin of birds and their relationship with other vertebrates. Then we will discuss structural and functional adaptations for flight with a focus on feathers because feathers are such unique features of birds. And then we will talk about the evolution of flight and flightlessness, and we will end with a discussion about conservation issues regarding birds. Every time I teach about birds, I like to start with this really profound question that has puzzled zoologists and just humans for millennia. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? That's a serious question. If you really think about it, the answer is the egg, right? Because the chicken is a modern bird, and the egg, at least the amniote egg, has been around for a really long time, as long as there have been amniotes since about the more than at least 250 million years uh, during the Paleozoic. So maybe a better question is which came first, the chicken or the chicken egg? Now that is the more puzzling question, and fortunately, it has already been addressed by our friends at ASAP Science. So go check out this video. The link will be in the description below. All right, what is a bird? Remember, this goes back from day one, right? We're trying to understand what is life, what makes a living organism, and what is an animal? What is a fish? What is a mollusk? Well, today we ask, what is a bird? The simplest answer is a bird is a feathered animal. That is because the single unique feature that distinguishes birds from all other living animals is their feathers. No other animals have feathers. So if it has feathers, it's a bird. Now, that is true for living species. However, some extinct dinosaurs that were not birds had feathers. We'll discuss that in a little bit. But in the modern day, in addition to feathers, all birds have forelimbs that are modified into wings, although not always used for flight. Birds also have hind limbs adapted for walking, swimming, or perching. Birds have keratinized beaks lacking teeth. Remember, keratin is that uniquely vertebrate protein, and birds have keratin in their beaks and also in their feathers. All birds have a shelled egg, and birds have endothermy. Endothermy is a fancy scientific word for producing heat from within. Right? Endo means within, and thermy means heat. And so here in this image, you see the heat signature of a vulture. You see that this animal, like us, is warm-blooded, but the scientific name for that is endothermy. And the relationship between birds and reptiles has been recognized for a long time. So, for example, Thomas Huxley, a contemporary of Darwin in the mid-1800s, said that birds are chlorophyte reptiles. This figure is from the previous chapter that we discussed last time, that video that focused on the reptiles. Remember that the diapsids are the modern day reptiles, but there were more groups of diapsids, right? There were the plesiosaurs, those reptiles that looked like the mythological Loch Ness monster. Though they were the ichthyosaurs, those reptiles that look like modern-day dolphins. And then there are the lepidosaurs, those reptiles that persist to this day in the form of snakes, lizards, and tuatara. And then there are the turtles. But there's another group um, of diapsids called the archosaurs. And the archosaurs are illustrated here in these lineages. There are several branches of archosaurs. One of them is the pterosaurs, this lineage that went extinct at the end Cretaceous. Then there are the crocodilians that persist to this day, and then there are the dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs are made of these groups over here. This is another figure from that I showed you before. This is sort of where we left off. I mentioned that traditionally there are two lineages of dinosaurs. Dinosauria is a clade, and there are two branches within it. One of them is the ornithischian branch. Those are the bird-hipped dinosaurs. Like they tended to be herbivorous, and many of them were armored, like my daughter's favorite, the Triceratops. And then there's one that I really like called the Stegosaurus. Those are ornithischian dinosaurs. The other branch of dinosaurs are the Saurischians, and those are the lizard-hipped dinosaurs. And those included the humongously large sauropods, which were herbivorous and quadrupedal, four-legged, right? And then there were the theropods, which were the carnivorous and bipedal dinosaurs like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus. So remember, this is where we left off last time. And I mentioned that most dinosaurs went extinct. Okay, what I just mentioned about this classification of dinosaurs into two lineages has been the traditional way to look at it. And it's been like that for a very long time. However, this recent paper that was published in 2017 in the journal Nature um, shed some light into the relationships of different dinosaur groups. Basically, they looked at more than 400 anatomical characters across all of these fossil dinosaurs, and they reconstructed a phylogeny. What they found is that the theropods are actually more closely related to the ornithischians than they are to the rest of Saurischia. So basically, they said that there are three distinct monophyletic clades within dinosaurs. There's the Ornithischia, the Saurischia, and the Theropoda being distinct from Saurischia. Now, what does that mean? Think about what does these new data reveal about the evolution of bipedality in dinosaurs? Well, look, there are some bipedal dinosaurs here in Saurischia, and their common ancestor would have been over here. And then there are all the theropods, which are bipedal, and their common ancestor is right over here. So if this hypothesis is correct, it would indicate that bipedality evolved twice in two independent lineages, in this one and in this one. All right, so let's go with that because that is the latest evidence. So let's say that there are three lineages of dinosaurs, the Ornithischia, the Saurischia, and the Theropoda. Now, if you look at this figure, which is from this chapter of the text, you see that the birds, here, the modern day birds, evolved from this theropod lineage. So basically, birds are theropods, which means that dinosaurs are not extinct because birds are theropods and theropods are dinosaurs. In fact, there are still about 10,500 species of dinosaurs living in our planet, which is really cool, right? This is why my daughter knows this. My favorite dinosaur is the chicken. I love chicken. All right, let's talk about this interesting fossil dinosaur, Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx was discovered in a layer of rock that was dated to about 147 million years ago. But it was discovered in 1861, and this was a huge, huge discovery because it was the transitional species, or is considered to be the transitional species between non-avian feathered dinosaurs and modern birds. Remember that even in that time, in the mid 1800s, the relationship between reptiles and modern birds was already being considered, but where was the transitional species? Well, boom, here it is. It was Archaeopteryx. Now, if you look closely, the skeleton of Archaeopteryx was decidedly reptilian. It had a long bony tail, it had abdominal ribs, it had clawed fingers, and it had a toothed jaw. All features that modern reptiles possess, but modern birds lack. However, it had feathers, which modern day birds possess and modern reptiles lack. So this was so you see this was a huge find because it possessed features of both reptiles and birds. So this is another figure that depicts the evolutionary relationships of birds and their theropod cousins. Here, we also include sauropods as the outgroup. So basically, this whole tree is a tree of Saurischian dinosaurs. Okay, so check this out. One of the features, the derived feature that all Saurischian dinosaurs have is that Saurischian pelvis, that lizard-hipped pelvis. Don't get confused, even though the other branch of dinosaurs is called the ornithischians, the bird-hipped dinosaurs. Birds did not come from ornithischians. Birds came from this group, from the theropods. Okay, so here we have this bipedal mode of locomotion. We have this elongated mobile S-neck shape, which is why birds do this, right? They have that S-shaped neck. They have hollow bones, and check this out. Here are the proto-feathers. So what does that mean? Does that mean that all the descendants from this ancestor had feathers? Probably, including Tyrannosaurus. So here we have other derived features that we see are going to wind up being utilized in flight. For example, here we just have filamentous feathers, which definitely did not support flight. And here we have what all modern birds have, which are asymmetrical feathers. We also have here the evolution of the furcula, which is the wishbone. It's basically the fused clavicles of the bird, which strengthen this whole part of the skeleton and support flight. And then here in the modern day birds, we definitely have that keel sternum, right? That's that part of the sternum that has this really large keel, which serves as a place for attachment of large breast muscles, which will flap the wings. And as is the case with all modern birds, the loss of teeth. So modern birds lack teeth. Okay, so according to that phylogeny that we just saw, feathers preceded birds and they preceded flight, right? Let's go back to that because feathers evolved somewhere around here And flight evolved somewhere around here, with Archaeopteryx probably being a flying bird, and then modern day birds. So feathers preceded birds and flight. Therefore, feathers must have served a different function. They are considered an adaptation that evolved only once in the theropods, but what do you suppose was the initial function of feathers if it wasn't flight? Well, feathers were probably used in thermal regulation or in crypsis or in courtship displays. And those are all valid hypotheses because modern birds use their feathers for thermal regulation, crypsis, and for courtship displays. So we now consider feathers to be an exaptation for powered flight. Okay, so let's pause here because this we need to discuss what we mean by adaptation and exaptation. An adaptation is a characteristic that helps an organism that possesses it survive or reproduce. An exaptation is when a structure or a feature or a characteristic already exists for a function and then it becomes co-opted to take on a different function. As I explained here, feathers is a good example because their current function is flight in many birds, but their ancestral function was probably something else like thermoregulation. If you think about it, most things that we think of adaptations are actually exaptations. It kind of depends on where the reference point is. For example, if you think that the hand is an adaptation of primates, you're probably right. But if we look further back, it's actually an exaptation of the forelimb that already existed in the tetrapods. This is one of my favorite videos. I won't play it for you, but you can go to the link, which will be in the description below, and you can see how some birds, like the birds of paradise, use their feathers in remarkable ways for courtship displays. So be sure to check this video out. It's one of my favorite videos of birds. Okay, let's talk about feathers briefly. Feathers are homologous with reptile scales. They develop from the epidermis, just like reptile scales, and they are keratinized, just like reptile scales. There are different types of feathers. There are contour feathers, which basically line the body of the bird. So when you look at a bird, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing its contour feathers. There are flight feathers, which are pretty much oversized contour feathers, and so they look like this. They are the down feathers that may be in your winter jacket or in your pillow. And those are used for thermal regulation. And then there are filiplume feathers that look like this, and their function is currently unknown. But basically, if you look at the way that feathers develop, they develop um, from the epidermal, what is called an epidermal thickening over a dermal core. Okay, so remember the epidermis is that outer layer of skin, and the dermis is the layer beneath. Here you see that the epidermis begins to thicken over that dermal cone, and that continues to occur. Then there is a protective sheath of keratin develops over this growing feather, and inside are the shaft and the barbs all folded up neatly. Well, the keratinized sheath will basically break open, and then the vein just unfolds. And what you see is this: the feather is made out of a quill, just like the stem, which continues to become the shaft, right? That's the main support of the feather. And then the shaft, or branching off from the shaft, are these tiny barbs. And then branching off from the barbs are these tiny barbules with little hooks. And then those little hooks grab onto each other, and it's sort of like Velcro. In a microscopic way, they create this continuous surface, which is what gives them, which is what makes a feather uh, almost like a wing, right? It gives the bird the ability to get some lift and fly. Feathers, when fully developed and fully grown, are like mammalian hair. They are a dead structure. So it doesn't hurt a bird when you clip its feathers. Feathers are molted, but this needs to occur in a very, very orderly process. For some reason, penguins don't do it that way. They just shed all their feathers at once, but in most other species, it's a very orderly process. What do you think that is? For example, in this raptor, this first anterior feather is shed at the same time as this one. Then, after that, the second one with the second one. Or in the same thing in the tail. The outer feathers will shed together, and then the ones that follow. So in raptors, which are birds of prey, like hawks and eagles, ospreys, owls, and vultures, why do you think feathers are molted in opposite pairs? All right, so feathers are what make birds some of the most beautiful and admired animals in the whole animal kingdom. Now, how do birds make colorful feathers? Well, there are two ways. Feathers can use what are called pigmentary colors. These colors are produced by depositing pigments in the barbules of the feather. So they can use melanins such as lipochromes, and they, they can use pigments like lipochromes and melanins. Melanin is a pigment that creates the darker colors, and we create melanin, right? That's what gives our skin and our hair its color. And so here we see light, for example, shining from the sun, and certain wavelengths are absorbed by a pigment. And then in this case, the red wavelength is reflected, and then that's what we see. We see a red cardinal. The other way that birds make colorful feathers is by using what are called structural colors. These are produced as light is refracted by the protein structure of the feather. Okay, so in pigmentary colors, light is reflected. In structural colors, light is refracted. So at a very microscopic or maybe nanoscopic level, the feather, the structure of the feather is made out of this keratin layer, underlain by some pigments, underlain by another keratin layer, underlain by some other pigments, and underlain by another keratin layer, right? So you see that it is not the pigments themselves, but it's actually the structure of these keratin layers that refracts light in different ways. So for example, here the light is coming in, and then light is refracted as it uh, goes through these semi-transparent keratin layers, and then the wavelength that we see depends on the angle that we're looking at the bird, right? That's why some birds look like they are a different color depending on what angle you're looking at it. One example of that are those iridescent feathers of hummingbirds or starlings. And so, some birds use both, right? So it's not like one or the other. Some birds use pigments and structures to create different colors. Okay, so one of the things that birds do is fly, right? How did birds evolve the ability to fly? Well, there are two competing hypotheses. One is called the arboreal hypothesis and the other is called the cursorial hypothesis. The arboreal hypothesis basically posits that flight evolved from the trees down. In other words, the ancestors of birds were arboreal, they glided from tree to tree, and they gradually evolved modifications that permitted lift and powered flight. On the other hand, the cursorial hypothesis posits that flight evolved from the ground up. In other words, ancestors of birds were ground-dwelling predators. They chased and leaped to capture flying insects, and they gradually evolved modifications that permitted lift and powered flight, as the illustration here above. Now, this debate between the proponents of each hypothesis has not been settled, and at some places can get heated. Either way, it appears that feathers are required for birds to fly. But not all flying animals have feathers, right? So which other vertebrate lineages that lack feathers evolved powered flight? We've discussed this before, and so you should know that there are three vertebrate lineages that evolved powered flight: the birds and two others. I'll leave that to you. But not all birds fly. So if birds evolved flight a long time ago, why do some modern day birds not fly? That's because flightlessness evolved several times. The large flightless birds like the ostrich, the rhea, and the emu form one monophyletic group. So that supports the idea that flightlessness evolved just once in that lineage and multiple species, and those species that belong to the group inherited their inability to fly. Also, flightlessness appeared independently among many groups of other smaller birds, such as pigeons, parrots, owls, and ducks. There are species of pigeons that don't fly. There are species of ducks that don't fly. And flightlessness does not appear randomly. Flightlessness almost always evolved on islands lacking large terrestrial predators, like this example with the flightless cormorant on the Galapagos Islands. So, how does the correlation between flightlessness and the lack of large predators inform the debate regarding the evolution of flight? Think about it. Maybe flight wasn't at all about catching flying insects as prey. Maybe it was about avoiding other terrestrial predators. Let's talk about some conservation issues, because unfortunately, many species of birds are in danger of extinction, and some have gone extinct recently. For example, this illustration shows the passenger pigeon, which was one of the world's most abundant birds. Estimates of its abundance were in the billions. That's billions with a B. And yet, it went extinct in 1914. What general threats do birds face worldwide? First, there is unregulated hunting. This is the direct, unregulated killing of birds by humans. Unregulated hunting is one of the main reasons why the passenger pigeon went extinct, and many species are still hunted in an unregulated way. Then there's pollution, which can take many forms. For example, the use
of lead in bullets for recreational hunting has led to the sharp decline of condor populations. Similarly, the widespread use of the insecticide DDT caused many species of raptors to decline. And of course, there's garbage, a lot of it which is found in the oceans and affects coastal birds. This is a big one, invasive species. Birds can face competition with other invasive birds such as common starlings or house sparrows. Here in Malibu, we have these parrots. I'm not really sure if they would be considered invasive, but certainly they are consuming resources that would have otherwise been available to native birds. And not just competition, but some birds are just killed directly by predators, invasive predators, such as snakes in islands like Hawaii and Guam, and the big one, cats, which kill millions of birds every year. So, for example, the brown tree snake has really decimated native birds in islands of the Pacific, like Guam. Then there's habitat loss, right? The removal of habitat available for birds. This is especially troubling in tropical areas because deforestation has been rampant in the tropics for a few decades now. And of course, there's climate change, which is an indirect threat to birds, usually through a variety of mechanisms. For example, the expansion of avian malaria is linked to global warming. And of course, avian malaria makes birds sick and kills birds. So these are the main 5 drivers of population decline in birds. And as we'll see later when we discuss more issues about conservation, these are the same 5 drivers of decline of many species. I hope you enjoyed this video about birds, some of the most fascinating and beautiful creatures on Earth. Feel free to comment or ask questions. And as always, be strong and courageous.